Kittens. I'm Chef Alex with Live Feed Catering in Chicago. Today we're going to be making an Orecchiette pasta. It's a good arts and crafts project for a family or something to do while you're binge watching Tiger King. It's a pretty simple recipe, so let's get started. So Orecchiette in Italian translates to little ears. The pasta comes from the Puglia region of Italy. It's a simple dough. The two types of pasta doughs, one of them is an egg pasta dough with durum, double O flour, and eggs. This is much simpler. It's semolina flour, water, olive oil, and that's it. Some people like to salt their pasta dough. I prefer to salt my pasta water, so we're going to leave the salt out of the dough. So the first step is to take your semolina flour. We're making a batch for about 4 people, so it's going to be 1.5 cups of semolina flour. You're going to want to put it on your cutting board or countertop. And then once you have it on your board, you want to kind of create a well in the middle. And then we've got 4 ounces of water with about 2 teaspoons of olive oil. We're going to pour some of that into the middle of the well. And then we'll start slowly incorporating the flour into the middle. So as you slowly incorporate, you want to try not to create too many holes, because then your water is going to start running all over your board. So you just want to slowly knead, and once all the flour soaks up that water, you're going to add a little bit more. It's going to look like a lot of flour and not enough water, but as you continue to knead the dough, it'll all incorporate. So once you have all your flour incorporated into the dough, you want it to be soft and malleable, but not too sticky. You want to knead it for a couple of minutes just to make sure all of the flour has absorbed the water. Traditional Italian semolinas are a little coarser ground, so you might need to add more water. Most of the semolina that you find in the US is a little finer, so you won't need as much water to absorb. And then once your pasta dough is set, we're going to let it rest for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and start rolling our orecchiette. Once your dough is rested, you want to cut a section of it off. It's a manageable piece. If you cut it into too many pieces too quickly, it's going to start to dry out, and then you'll need to reincorporate water. So I'm going to cut about 1/4 of it off. Lay the rest of it off to the side. Right. So once you have your pasta dough rolled out into ropes, you want them to be about 1/2 inch thick. And we're going to cut them into about 1/2 inch squares. So I'm using a pastry knife. If you don't have one, you can just use a regular knife. Just make sure not to cut yourself. So once you have the little pillows, we're going to set those aside. Again, you want to work in manageable amounts so that they're not drying out. And we're going to take a regular butter knife. Kind of any flat surface or flat edged knife or utensil is fine. You just want to make sure that it's not too sharp so you don't cut yourself. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the knife at a 30-degree angle and scrape. And as you scrape, the dough is going to curl up. Once we have this small batch all curled up, we're going to unfold them and use our thumb to invert the orecchiette into the little ears. So once you have all your orecchiette rolled, you're going to lay them out in a single layer, sprinkle it with some semolina flour, and then let it dry, preferably overnight, or at least for 3 hours. What that's going to do is it's going to let the pasta to cook evenly when you do go to boil it. So once your pasta is dried, it's ready to cook, or you can bag it up and freeze it for later use. Today we're obviously going to cook it, so what we're doing is we've got a preheated saucepan. We're going to add a little bit of olive oil, and then we're going to start to render our pancetta. You don't want to go too much olive oil because the pancetta will render out some of its fat. So once your pancetta has started to render a little bit, we're going to add our oyster mushrooms. Once those are started to cook down a little bit, we'll add our brunoise, shallot, and garlic. So once your shallots and garlic are in the pan, right about now is when you're going to want to drop your pasta. What we're going to do is we're going to let the pasta boil for about 4 minutes. And then just to cheat a little bit of time, I'm going to drop my fava beans in for about 2 minutes. You can use frozen peas or whatever vegetables are in your fridge. So once the shallots are lightly sweated, we're going to add a dash of Espelette chili powder. It's French chili powder from the Basque region. If you don't have this, you can substitute chili flake or Calabrian chili, kind of anything that's just going to give a little bit of heat just to balance out all of the fat from the butter and the cheese that we're going to add to the pasta. You want to toast the Espelette for about 30 seconds. Once that's nice and aromatic, we're going to deglaze with about 1.5 ounces of white wine. So we've added our fava beans to the pasta water, let it boil for about another minute, minute and a half. Now that that's ready, we're going to start draining the pasta. Once we have the pasta drained, we're going to reserve a little bit of the liquid that we're going to use for our sauce, probably about 1/2 cup. Now the pasta right now is going to be a little bit al dente because it's going to cook a little bit more in the sauce. So now that we have our drained pasta and fava beans and our sauce has been reduced to au sec or dry, we're going to add our pasta to the pan. At this point we're going to add about 4 tablespoons of butter. And then about 1/4 cup of our pasta water. And we're going to add some of our cheese. I use about a 50-50 blend of Parmesan and Pecorino Romano. The Romano is just a little bit sharper of a cheese, and it'll complement the fava beans and the pancetta really nicely. So the benefit of using the Orecchiette is the dome in the ears is going to capture some of the small bits of the sauce, like the shallots, the garlic, the pancetta. So once our sauce has kind of started to bind to the noodles, we're going to add a couple squeezes of fresh lemon. And I've got some sliced chives. So we're going to keep mixing. And then you can see the sauce is kind of coating the pasta nicely. There's not too much in the bottom of the pan. If it looks like there's too much sauce, you can add a little more cheese to get it to stick more. If the sauce starts to break, you'll see kind of oil around the edges. At that point, you would just add a little bit more of your pasta water that already has some gluten in it from cooking the pasta, so that'll help bind the butter back into a smooth sauce. And then once your pasta is all set, you are ready to serve. This recipe can, again, be made with whatever ingredients you have in your fridge. But if you follow these easy steps, you'll have a recipe that you won't want to keep buried. Looking at you, Carol Baskin.